Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. You know, I've been doing quite a few Assetto Corsa mod reviews lately, and I figured perhaps this time around it might benefit us to do something a little bit more tangible. Here, rendered in 1/18 scale for all of you, is a 1992 Williams FW14B brought to us by Exoto Models. Here we're going to have a look at the FW14B by Exoto and have a look at all of the wonderful details that you can see even in small scale on this legendary race car. It is no secret that I absolutely love the FW14 and the FW14B. It has featured in many a video on my channel, and with good reason. This car, designed by Patrick Head and Adrian Newey, was the legendary active suspension Formula One car that absolutely ripped a new one in the World Championship in 1992. The FW14 debuted in 1991 as what was then known as a passive car, rather a traditional car, having fixed suspension elements that simply reacted to all of the pitch, yaw, and roll moments imparted into the chassis via the forces on the track. However, the 14B debuted the active suspension concept for Williams, and active suspension meant that the car could be proactive rather than reactive when it came to vehicle dynamics. Active suspension enabled the car to do very crazy things more at home when talking about aeronautics than automotive mechanics. The car, for example, was able to alter its ride height as it was running on the track. In other words, it could raise its ride height down the straights to cut air resistance through the diffuser and pick up some straight line speed. It could lower its ride height into the corners for more downforce. Additionally, it could roll in or out of a corner depending on what the tire wear situation was, and of course aid the driver in attaining the perfect balance in terms of oversteer and understeer. 14B and 15C, which followed it in 1993, are still to this day two of the most advanced Formula One cars ever to race, and because of the dominance of 14B and 15C in 1992 and 1993, the FIA took it upon themselves to ban the active suspension concept for 1994, thus returning Formula One to a passive, traditional suspension concept that we have seen forevermore. The FW14 and FW14B are rightly placed among the legendary cars of Formula One history. They were so radical, they were so good in every sense of the word. 1991 was a bit of a test year for Williams. Yes, they did manage to win a couple of races, courtesy of Nigel Mansell and Riccardo Patrese. However, this car, with the radical new semi-automatic gearbox, which was brand new for Williams in 91, the Renault V10 engine as well, some reliability issues were found over the course of 1991, which allowed McLaren and their MP46, still with a straight-up traditional manual gearbox, to take the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships that year. However, in 1992, all of those teething problems were sorted, and Williams, courtesy of Mansell and Patrese once again, were on to dominate the Constructors' Championship, and Nigel Mansell, of course, took his first and only Drivers' Championship as well in 1992. This car, for me, has a little bit of sentimental value as well because I was born in 1992, and as an avid model car collector, even though you guys don't really see them that often anymore, I did think it was appropriate to have the 1992 Constructors' Championship winner in my collection, simply because, well, that's the year I was born, and I love Formula One, and I love history as well, so a little bit of an artifact with maybe some indirect personal significance as well. The Assetto Corsa videos that I have done over the years featuring the FW14 from 1991, yeah, you've all been able to see how fast this car is, and you've seen the wonderful modding work done by ASR, who are the proprietors of that absolutely wonderful FW14 mod. However, this in the flesh, an Exoto model, it just has a different flavor to it. Obviously, we can't drive the car, but this is something that you can reach out and touch. It's something tangible. It's something that your eyes can really digest. And I figured perhaps you guys would like that. There are a lot of details on this model. It is wonderfully crafted, and it certainly was not cheap, I'll say that. But you can see the livery here. It's in a preseason test livery. It never raced in this livery. It's essentially just bare carbon at the moment. We can stop the rotation here, and we can just have a look at some of the details. as well as we can. Not entirely sure how well the autofocus is going to help us out here. However, you can see that paint finish on the model, of course. The entire body is done in die cast. However, it is textured with that carbon look. I'm not entirely sure if you're going to be able to see any carbon texturing on the black sections of the bodywork, which is the vast majority of the car. But on the front nose section here, that cover just over the front suspension, you can definitely see that there is a bit of a texture effect going on there. And if we can get this thing to focus, perhaps, there we go. You can see that there is a carbon texture there. I believe that section would more so be Kevlar than carbon, because in this part of the car, as the airflow goes over the front wing, I could imagine a lot of debris might make it up into this area, so they just want to protect those suspension components which are underneath. No traditional springs in this car, as we shall see when we take the bodywork off. However, lots of hydraulic lines and gas struts and hydraulic cylinders in this area, which could be susceptible to punctures from debris, so I'd imagine they'd want to beef up that panel just a little bit. Not to mention that the driver's head is right there, of course. Talking about cockpit protection in modern day Formula One, well, nothing really to speak of that in this era, of course. Just the overall fit and finish of this model, though, is really something to behold. We'll get it to rotate again a little bit. You can just see how the light falls across it as it spins around. Absolutely love the quality of the reflection there in the paint. It's just mirror-like. It really is. Absolutely love the detail on these Exoto models. I've only got two Exoto models. It's this one, and then I have a Renault RE20 from 1981 as well, which is also brilliant. But this one is definitely my favorite. Not only the subject matter, but you just can see the level of workmanship that they put into each and every model. Absolutely great. By the way, this is 1/18 scale, if I didn't mention that yet. 1/18 scale, I absolutely love it. I think it's the perfect balance between size and accessibility, really. It's big enough to where you can see all of the fine details, but it's not too big so that it becomes a little bit cumbersome to store. So 1/18 scale, I think, is a perfect compromise. Looking at some of the closer up details on the exterior of the model, there are lots of opening features on this car, which of course we're going to have a look at, but you can just barely see into the cockpit there. This is about as close in as we can get with this particular lens, but you can see the steering wheel there with the appropriate decals. Looks absolutely great. And also, if we can get this angle right, it's really quite difficult to get it right, but behind the steering wheel, I don't think you can see it, there is, believe it or not, a dashboard, which is actually modeled. Absolutely wonderful attention to detail there by Exoto, even though there's essentially no prayer of you ever seeing that detail. Of course, you'll notice also in the cockpit seat belts, which are actual fabric. So of course they are wonderfully detailed. You can see the buckle there in the center and the leg straps in there as well. Absolutely wonderful stuff. On the right side of the monocoque, you can see the FIA decal 1992, if we can get the light to fall in there just right. Yeah, absolutely wonderful stuff. The FIA homologation sticker and the 1992 registration decal. There we go with the lighting. Absolutely wonderful stuff. I love fine details, and in Assetto Corsa mods and other sims, I love it when a modding team goes the extra mile to put those kinds of details into a car. No different when it comes to 1/18 scale model cars. Absolutely great stuff there. Over on the other side of the cockpit, there's not as much to see, but you can start to see, if we can get this again to focus just right. Let's try that in there. Yeah, not too bad. You can see that there is a Williams chassis plate in there. Yep, right about there. There's a Williams chassis plate and some other chassis information on that side of the cockpit. Very, very cool. But as you can see, getting light into that section of the model is not very easy at all. So we're just going to try and do the best we can there. There's really not much else to see in the cockpit anyway. However, there is a lot more to see on this model when you start to pull out back to the exterior, and of course that means taking some of the bodywork off, which I need two hands to do. But first off, the thing that I can do one-handed is on the front end here. You can see we talked about this panel over here before, I'm calling it Kevlar. This covers the front suspension dampers. And of course you can see the double wishbone push rod suspension on the front end right there. That is totally accurate in terms of its shape and geometry. And of course that was the design trend back then, double wishbone push rod actuated. Works a bit differently though on this car because of that active suspension system, as we have already discussed. However, you just reach over and pull that off. There is a little magnetic clasp right on the bottom section of the bodywork right there, which very nicely holds that little piece of bodywork on so it just doesn't rattle around when you've just got the model on display. Put that over here, and now we'll have a look at those suspension components. Very nicely modeled. There is a bit of a manifold over there on the rearmost section underneath this bodywork. There's just a little pressure manifold right in that area right there, just controlling the hydraulic fluid being fed into the gas struts, which you can see right there. These are actually the dampers. There are no springs inside here. They are all filled with hydraulic fluid and their little pistons, which would go back and forth, and the tension keeping those pistons in place could be adjusted by varying the pressure of the hydraulic fluid behind them. So that is effectively your spring rate on the car. You could make the car stiffer or softer depending on what you need for a given instant while you're out on track. Of course, all of that is controlled in real time by the car's onboard computer systems. Right in the front here, that silverish circular area, that is the brake master cylinder, and that would only really be accessible either from this angle here with the topside bodywork removed. That also would be accessible if you remove the front nose cone. Nose cone is not removable on this model, but obviously the real car, the mechanics would have the luxury of being able to get in there and work on the brake master cylinder in that area. But that's the first bit of detail you can see underneath the bodywork on this 1/18 scale version, and it's absolutely marvelous. Of course, the second bit of detail on this model underneath the bodywork is in the rear, of course. That is where that 3.5 liter V10 engine is stowed, and it's an absolutely glorious engine, as you shall see. However, one very innovative and very useful feature on this model is that these wing mirrors here on the sides of the cockpit, they swivel, and the reason they swivel is not so you can angle the mirrors in different positions so that you could fit different drivers with different heights and sight lines into the car. It's so that you can remove this rear bodywork, which all comes off in one big clamshell piece, and the forwardmost sections of that bodywork right here would rip the mirrors out of their posts if you didn't swivel them backward first. So that's a very nice touch. However, we can lift this bodywork off very carefully. Initially we lift it up and then we slide it forward ever so slightly, and then off it comes. And you see underneath that massive Renault V10 engine. There's so much detail in here, I could probably spend an hour just talking about all of it. But initially what you see there, obviously you see Renault F1, you see the very nice carbon look air snorkel here. We'll get some light on it in a second. There we go. And you can also see those exhaust primaries. Have a look at them. They are all individually cast. And a lot of materials in this car are actually what they call in the modeling world noble materials, meaning that they are made out of realistic materials. Those exhaust primaries, for example, they're made of aluminum. They're not plastic castings. That is actual aluminum coming out of the sides of that engine. The engine itself is plastic, but you've got aluminum exhaust primaries there, and then you can see as they wind their way down to the bottom of the car into the collector pipe to exhaust out each side of the diffuser. Obviously, there are other primaries on the other side. Absolutely beautiful detail. Moving to the rear section, you can see the gearbox, and of course you can see the rear suspension actuators now. You can see all of that plumbing, that hosing going in to the pressure manifold for the rear suspension control, and of course the gold cylindrical sections are the struts for the rear suspension. Pistons inside there, surrounded by pressurized hydraulic fluid just like on the front. So Williams had full control of front and rear suspension travel and stiffness over the course of this car's life. Absolutely wicked system. Great detail going on here in the engine bay, as you can readily see we'll get the car to rotate here just so you can get 360-degree view in here. Wonderful, wonderful detail, as you can see. Really great. Have a look. The heat reflection underneath there. Reflection of the exhaust primaries visible there. That is, I believe that is aluminum sheet. Actually, it's an extremely thin sheet of aluminum underneath those exhaust primaries, and it's polished to a mirror finish. That is great. Absolutely great detail in there. Love it, love it, love it. Also, just the more you look at this engine bay, there's more detail that jumps out to you. When the car spins around again, we'll stop the rotation, because I just want to point out that you can actually see the geometries there in the radiator matrix. So we'll get a rear on view, and you can see the radiator duct here. This is the inside of the side pod now, and you can see the radiator matrix in there. We'll stop the rotation, and we'll show you this area. Here's the radiator, the back side of the radiator, and you can see it is all modeled. It's photo etched, again in aluminum, I believe. It's some sort of metal, probably aluminum. And you can see the radiator matrix on both sides of the engine bay. That is absolutely wild detail in there. And you can also see coming down at about 45 degrees, you can see just a little stay coming through there, through this section of the car. Absolutely great, just to help with the torque effects of the engine going through the driveline there and keep everything in line with itself. Great. Additionally, you can see one of these coolant return lines coming back from the radiator. Just water would be the coolant in this car. No need for antifreeze compounds or anything like that, but just wonderful attention to detail all throughout this engine bay. Absolutely glorious. Additionally, that Renault air snorkel, that carbon look air snorkel that you can see here, that is also removable. So just a moment, I've got to put my light down so we can do that. This comes off. Again, very nicely modeled. It's a carbon look, as you can see, emblazoned with the Renault logo there. So the geometry through there. It's actually a pass-through snorkel. So this is a hollow tubular section of molded plastic made to look like carbon fiber. We'll just set that down over there. And now you can see the top side of the engine, the intake plenum, and of course the intake trumpets there as well. The fuel injectors are not modeled here, but the fuel injectors will be going across the top of that, spraying fuel into each cylinder. Of course, you can see there are 10 intake trumpets, one for each cylinder on this 10-cylinder engine. I love it. I absolutely love the attention to detail in this car. Just absolutely great. Additionally, you can see some thermal stickers there just so that the mechanics could record the peak temperatures of all the components. So you can see a thermal sticker there on the oil tank, the auxiliary oil tank there for the dry sump system, and you can see some thermal stickers on the suspension struts as well. Wonderful, wonderful attention to detail all around on this model. Absolutely glorious stuff. Now we've switched cameras so we can have a little bit better close-up look at all of the detail in here, because there's a lot of it. There are those thermal stickers that I mentioned before over the gearbox casing on all of the suspension and oil system components, just showing you the peak temperatures there. We still can't quite get in close enough to actually see the detail on the stickers themselves, but I'm led to believe that if you could magnify them enough, they're probably legible. That's insane. That's an absolutely insane level of detail there. Of course, across the top of the engine here, some better details come into focus. The throttles, they, could you say that those are throttle bodies in there? Yeah, I guess you could say that there are actual throttle bodies modeled in there, at least sort of. Maybe my mind's eye is projecting in there, but obviously there would be 10 individual butterflies there for the throttle actuation on this engine. Of course, fly-by-wire throttle in the era, even though it was not a particularly common concept yet for that semi-automatic gearbox, so that you could have the perfect downshift, you needed a fly-by-wire throttle, and that would have been on this engine for sure. Additionally, over the top of the gearbox casing here, everything has been finished to look like it is probably titanium in this era. So just the top of the gearbox casing, very, very nice. And you can see in a little bit better proportion now the pressure manifold system for that active suspension. Great. Little radiator down here. That is for gearbox cooling. I'm led to believe there would be oil lines going into that just to cool the gearbox oil as well. Additionally, you can see a little pump here driven off the engine. Led to believe that is probably the water pump. That would be driven off of the camshaft. Obviously, this being a valve-covered twin camshafts per bank of cylinders for 4 camshafts in total, and this is clearly some sort of pump run off of one of the camshafts. Not entirely sure if that's a hydraulic pump or a water pump for the coolant, but it's some sort of pumping mechanism there, and you can see lines going across back into the radiator area. So very, very cool. Speaking of the radiators, get a better look at them now. Just great. I love the detail work in there. And actually, I run my fingers across them. They're actually sharp. There are sharp edges here. Like, I mean, if I really used pressure, I'd probably cut myself on them. They're very, very nicely done, I must say. Great, great stuff. Moving over the rear wing now. Having a look at the proportions. You can see the rear rain light right there. Very nicely modeled. It's actually textured. There is an actual lens on it. You can see when I get the light lined up with it, it is quite reflective indeed. So, yep, that is actual lensing on that rain light. Really, really great. Looking underneath the car, you can see the diffuser and you can see the exhaust outlets there. Obviously blown diffuser. However, the car would probably get very twitchy off throttle. And of course, driving this car in Assetto Corsa, I can attest to that fact. These cars are quite twitchy off throttle because the velocity of the exhaust gas going through the diffuser pretty much reaches 0 because the engine is essentially cut off when you're off the throttle. Obviously, fuel savings were of some concern in this era because there was, of course, no refueling. Additionally, toward the upper section of the engine bay, you can see the Magneti Marelli control box. This is the ECU for the engine, and it has its own little thermal sticker, as you can see there, and you can see the umbilical lines coming off of the bottom of that computer. Speaking of computers, this is the side pod, and you can see here, these are some of the main control boxes for the active suspension system. So you've got this box, and you've got this box right here. And they've even gone to the trouble to model the little umbilical connect going into one of the swappable memory cards, going into the ROM memory for the car. I believe the car had 4 megabytes of memory. Remember, this is 1992. 4 megabytes, I think, was the maximum capacity of one of those cards. So it would carry maybe 3 laps worth of data, telemetry data, really detailed telemetry data for the teams. Obviously, with the antennas coming off the car, they'd have some data bursting its way into the pits whenever the car passed the pit lane. But this box here would record every single parameter for playback once they got the car back in the garage. Absolutely great modeling work. On the other side here, we've got the bodywork in the way off to the side, but we've got some more electronics detail on this side here. We've got a bit more. Some of the control boxes over here. These are probably the car's batteries, so very, very cool. And then another computer box here. Very nicely done indeed. And this little area, it looks like it would be a cap of some sort. I wonder if that is where you would add coolant to the car. I really do have to wonder. It's over the intake duct for the radiator. I do wonder if that is a little coolant reservoir. Very cool. Very, very cool. I would love to be able to see one of these in real life up close and personal, just to see just how faithful they have been modeling all of this stuff on this model. But really, I've got to say they've done an absolutely resplendent job. There's that engine again. You can see those exhaust primaries glinting off in the light. It's just so very, very cool. However, there is one more detail on this car that we have yet to discuss. All 4 of these wheels, yeah, these wheels, guess what? They come off. And they come off by means of unfastening the minuscule wheel nuts on the center hub there by means of this bespoke wrench. Yeah, it's an actual lug wrench for a model car. Of course, this is a rather delicate operation and involves actually
screwing each wheel nut with said wrench. So I've got to go do that, and then we'll have a look at the detail that lurks underneath. As you can see, taking the wheels off is about a 2-minute job on this model. It's a little bit slower than the 7-ish second pit stops of the era. However, once you do get those wheels off, you get an absolute menagerie of detail. Have a look at this front left brake disc. Yeah, it rotates inside the caliper right there. How is that for detail? That's great. Speaking of the caliper, there's another thermal sticker right there, and you can also see the AP Racing decal on the caliper itself. That is absolutely ridiculous. There's your axle stub. It's threaded, obviously, so the wheel nut can actually go on there and fasten the wheel on, but you can see that suspension detail all the better. And guess what? The steering also works. Yeah, there's your tie rod there going into the chassis. Absolutely great. That is the steering. You can also see the brake duct detail there, feeding that fresh air in for cooling the brakes. The disc itself, it's cross-ventilated as well, so you can see the vent holes through the perpendicular surface of the disc as it rotates around through there inside the caliper. That is unreal level of detail right there. Also, you can see on the braking surface itself that mottled appearance, trying to render that carbon detail there on the brake surface. You could just get a better sense of the overall layout of the car now that everything is undressed. All the bodywork is off, the wheels are off. Speaking of the wheels, here is the right front wheel. Very cool detail there. You can see that tire tread pattern, and the texture of this rubber, it's a little squishy. I don't know how well you can really see, but squeeze it and it deforms a little bit. It's not super hard rubber. It actually deforms a little bit under the weight of the car when the car is sitting on its wheels. Really great detail, and you can get in closer and you can see that there is lettering there right here on the sidewall. Very, very nice, and it actually reads, "For racing purposes only, not for highway use." Absolutely great. The embossed lettering on the sidewall in addition to the big Goodyear Eagle branding. Very, very, very cool. Fun Mattel wheels as well, as you can see. And a little detail there on the side. It's upside down. There we go. That sticker on the inside, that says Williams Grand Prix Engineering. Really cool, and even the valve stem is right there. So, very cool. Speaking of the wheel nuts, here's a wheel nut. Yeah, it's absolutely minuscule, and the model does not come with any spare wheel nuts. So if you lose one, that's it. I have no idea where you could find nuts this size that would engage with these threads. So that's what you've got. Do not lose these wheel nuts, otherwise you will never get this car back together. But aside from that, you've got an absolutely wonderful display piece here with wheels that come off glorious. Taking the wheels off also gives you the chance to have a better look at the rear section of the car. Now that the tire is out of the way, you can see those wonderful exhausts in so much more detail. Here, there's so much more to be seen. They are fully modeled across their entire length to the outlet there through the diffuser. And speaking of the diffuser, you can just see the bodywork come back in here with that carbon look. And of course, moving down through this section of the car, you can see the diffuser proper. You can see that V-shaped channel, the air coming in through that direction, just being funneled out through the top side of the diffuser. Rear brakes, you can see that there are two ducts on the rear brakes. Once we get focus again, if it will focus again, yes, you can see there's an upper duct and a lower duct, and obviously that feeds into the caliper and disc assembly here for the rear axle. Again, pass-through calipers on this side so that rotor can rotate freely. You can even see here on the rear brakes, you can see how the rotor is affixed to the axle with these little bolts and nuts there. Absolutely marvelous level of detail once again. I cannot get enough of this car, but I think we have seen pretty much everything there is to see on Exoto's FW14B in test spec anyway, with the testing livery from 1992. We'll get the car dressed up again, and then we will share our final thoughts. So as you can see, we've got all four wheels back on. That went without incident. One thing that if you do have this car, I just want to point out, don't be scared of this, the front wheel nuts, they tighten in two steps. They tighten up hard to a first step, and then the front wheels will really click into position, and then you can tighten them more. They are right tightening nuts on all sides of the car, so no reverse threading or anything like that. But don't worry about cross threading them if they suddenly tighten up again about halfway through the travel. They're designed to do that. However, the only things that remain to do, get the air snorkel back on and get the bodywork back on. So our air snorkel goes on like so, like that. It just sits on top of the engine. As you can see, that is in place. And now, of course, the engine cover, which I just want to point out underneath, more heat reflectivity right there, more sheet metal. Very, very cool. So bodywork goes on in the reverse as it came off, so tilt it back, slide it back, make sure your clearances are good around the sides of the car. You don't want to be going on crooked, so that's good. Goes down, slides forward ever so slightly. Make sure the shut line, give it a tap for a sec, there you go. Shut line is good. And then swing your wing mirrors back into position. And your rear body work is back installed. Then just remains the front cover. Tab faces forward, so that slots in like so. And then magnetic clasp. And the car, just like that, is dressed again. This is a bit of a different sort of video. I started my channel by posting reviews of my 1/18th scale model cars. I have not done one in about 7 years. However, I just figured maybe you guys would appreciate a look at something a little bit more tangible, because I've been doing a lot of Assetto Corsa mod reviews, but I'm also a big fan of real world model cars as well, and this one is really, really special and really, really cool. So let me know what you guys think about videos like this, because I really enjoy these just as much as I enjoy making the mod reviews. And of course, we've got some great mods forthcoming, so keep looking for those as well, because I intend to keep churning them out. Until next time, however, do subscribe, comment, like, and share. I really appreciate all of that, and of course, I really enjoy reading all of your comments and hearing your feedback and starting a discussion about motorsports, which of course we all know and love. Until next time, though, thank you very, very much for watching. FerrariMan601 saying thanks, and we will see you soon.